The Mystery of the Shemitah, one of your great books. Since you were here last, you really confirmed so much that has begun. And we're in this year of Jubilee. So much has happened. Could you go over that? Because people always say, well, I thought something was going to happen with the Shemitah.
Since I was here, much came out confirming the things that we have said. And let me share that.
Can you do that?
Absolutely. And some things I'm going to share in some detail that I've never shared in any kind of format like this. So you're actually going to see this. Every time we speak, I always give a caution. God does not do anything the way we think he does, and you can't put a date on this. But the judgment has not yet come that I believe the harbinger is foreshadowing. But the Shemitah absolutely did come. And several things came out since we were here. First of all, what happened to the stock markets of the world in the Shemitah? One of the things is that what happened? British markets, 16% wiped out. French markets, 18% wiped out. German markets, 25% wiped out in the Shemitah. India, the Shemitah wiped out 4,000 points. Brazil, the Shemitah wiped out 12,000 points. America, the Shemitah wiped out $2 trillion from the markets. Around the world, the Shemitah wiped out $11 trillion. I want to show you if they have the graph. Show Wall Street if you have that. That's what the Shemitah did to Wall Street. Look, that's the year 2000. Do the next one.
Did that drop?
It was around the world. The next one, you have the United Kingdom. That's what the Shemitah did to the United Kingdom, that right there. Next one, I believe we have France. The Shemitah did to France over there. Next one, Australia. And that's also around the world, Australia. And then you have India. The Shemitah struck India as well. That's right there. Canada. That's what the Shemitah did to Canada. China has become the center of the world. If we were in China, we wouldn't even be talking about this, because what happened in China, first of all, people don't realize it. In 2009, China became the largest exporter nation in the world. In 2013, it became the largest trading nation, surpassed America. 2014 became the largest economy. So that all happened. So now the Shemitah tends to focus on where this is the engine of the world economy. What happened to China? Show the graph of China. In the Shemitah, what the Shemitah did to China is the Shemitah wiped out 43% of the financial realm of China. 43%. And that alone would be gigantic, but it did it all in 2.5 months. That makes it probably the greatest crash in world history, what happened to China. The predominant pattern in the mystery of the Shemitah is that of a rising stock market, and then it begins a long-term collapse, which is exactly what... This has happened in the last 7 of them. From 2008, Great Recession. 2001, everything. 1994, the bond market massacre. 1987, Black Monday. 1980, the recession. 1973, recession. 1966, the last 7, you had collapses. You had the same exact thing happened in this Shemitah as well. Now, it didn't have to happen, but it did. Now, I'm going to show you a graph where you can see the bigger picture. And what you're going to see is, you'll see a graph of the rising stock market last few years, and then you're going to see a pink period. That's the Shemitah. Look what happened to the stock market, rising for years once the Shemitah came. The Shemitah turned it around from a rising stock market to a descending one. That's America. Show Germany. Look what happened in the Shemitah, rise, falls. Show the United Kingdom. Rising for years, Shemitah comes, look what happens. Since we were here, the 2015 ended. All over the web, all over they took account of what happened, and this is the headline of what the Shemitah did. Let's see that, the headline. It was the worst year since when? 2008. How many years? 7 years. Wow. 2015 was the worst year since 2008, which is not only 7 years, it just happens to be the Shemitah. Show the next one there. Just show some headlines from that. Wall Street records worst year again since 2008. The next one. 2015, worst year. It's the first time since the last Shemitah that Wall Street finished in the red. So this is not Christian news sites. This is Wall Street Journal. That alone, the fact is that the predominant pattern totally happened exactly as it was to be. Not the way maybe we can have ideas of it, but it happened exactly so. Wiped it out. But there's much more, because we'll see as we go on that it not only wiped out Wall Street, it wiped out global trade collapsed, commodities, oil collapsed, industrial production collapsed, everything. It's still collapsing, by the way. Well, I'll share that. And I'll show it to you visually. So it's not a matter of feeling. It's not a matter of our talk. It's absolute real. God is very real. He's very exact. He is in charge of everything, including Wall Street, including our bank accounts.
Yes.
He's that much in charge.
Yes.
Well, I really want to hear more of this, and throughout this week, you're going to give us some more.
And I'm going to show you
of what's really going on now.
Yeah. First of all, one of the things in the Harbinger and in the Mystery of the Shemitah, you'll actually see the words appear. It says the effects of the Shemitah, the repercussions, not only affect the financial realm, but the realm of production, consumption, and trade. Because in the Bible, when you had the Shemitah, the land stopped producing. They didn't have industry like we do, but they had production. The land stopped producing. They stopped selling the fruit, so trade stops or decreases. And well, in the modern times, that translates to trade and all those things. So here's the question. Did the Shemitah affect not just the stock market, all that, but actually all these other realms? And I want to show you something. If you have global trade, you have the headline on global trade. This is what happened. This is what the Shemitah did to global trade. Plummets 70%. 70% in 3 weeks.
Wow.
Let's do the next one on global trade. Is collapsing. Was literally the Shemitah really in that time? It collapsed. Next one, world trade. It's biggest since when? 2008, the other Shemitah. Again, and this is not Christian. This is secular. Okay. The next one, I believe they have one more. In free fall, literally, I mean, this is one of the most uncovered stories of the last year, and that is that global trade has totally collapsed. I mean, to this day. Now, here we have a graph. In a moment, you're going to see the pink area represents the Shemitah. This is world imports. Look at what happened at world imports. You see it's high up with a blue?
Yes.
Then once the Shemitah comes, look what happens. It goes down and below that level. It collapses to nearly half. There's something called the Baltic Dry Index. Let me tell you what that is. And you have to know, we don't know a lot. Well, it measures basically shipping and world trade. Well, see the headline on the Baltic Dry Index, what the Shemitah did to the Baltic Dry Index. This year, it was the worst in 30 years. But the fact is, the Baltic Dry Index only existed for 30 years, so it's the worst ever in the history of the world. Show the next one. Their Baltic Dry Index, I believe you have an all-time low, totally collapsed. I'll give you an example. You know, the Shemitah was 2014, 2015. 2014 began, the Baltic Index was at 2,000. By the end of 2015, it was at 400. It wiped out like 80% of it. Okay. Another thing you'll read.
No, that's trade. That's
trade. It's not speculation like the markets. It's real trade and goods. Yeah, and that's going to bring it to the next one. One of the things you'll see in the Harbinger on the Mystery of the Shemitah, that chapter, and I believe in the Mystery of the Shemitah, is also that says in the Shemitah, the fruit of the land is abandoned. So therefore, today economically, we'd expect commodities to be unsold, piling up, merchandise to pile up. Well, look, demand dries up. Look what happened to commodities. Commodity slump, 16-year low. This is the Shemitah. Next one. Worst year for dry bulk commodities worst year on record was the Shemitah. Now, I'm going to show you a chart from Bloomberg News on what happened to the Shemitah and the commodity market. Let's see that graph. Look what happened.
Wow.
Look what happened as it approaches the end of the Shemitah. Wipeout.
Hits bottom.
Now, one of those, this is what happened. This is what, this is one of the biggest stories, and most people haven't heard it. The other thing is what happened to another commodity called oil. Let's see the next graph, and I want you to see something here on oil. Now, that's by 14 years. You see with the pink?
Yeah.
The first pink is 2008 Shemitah. Look what happened to oil.
Crash.
Second pink is 2015. Look what happened to oil.
Down the same.
So this is the Shemitah. Now you go to the gas station.
And we're right there. And we're down in that bottom right now. Aren't we?
You go to the gas station and you have cheap. You can thank the Shemitah for that. The collapse of trade has not stopped. And if you look at this next one, this is what happened to this point around where we are right now. It's continued to collapse. God is very, very, very real. In the book, in both things, the overall pattern is exactly this: that it affects every realm. And even though I haven't yet touched on the dramatic day crashes, which we will, it even affected that too. But this is the absolute pattern that you'll read in the books. Trillions
of dollars crashed at the beginning of the Shemitah, and most people just kind of, well, nothing really happened.
Yeah, or actually at the climax when it should have.
Yeah.
Yeah. believers are believers, and meaning, okay, it's the end of the world, the rapture. That's not what it was. But the predominant pattern of the Shemitah is a long-term collapse, which is exactly what happened. We've shown. I didn't want to just say it like this is our feeling or this is our opinion. I've showed you actual charts of what happened. 2015 was the worst year since 2008, the other Shemitah, for the stock market, for trade, for everything collapsed. We spoke about the stock market. We spoke about global trade, which is, by the way, still at its collapse. It's still all over the world. Well, that's in the Harbinger, and that's in the Shemitah. It says these things will happen. If you look at it, it talks about trade. It talks about all those things. But now let's take to another realm. Another realm in the Harbinger and in the Shemitah, it says this. Literally, the Shemitah causes production to decrease or decline. Production. Now, what it means is, I said that the land didn't produce. During the Shemitah, you're not getting stuff produced from the land. So today, it would be not only, it would be the land, but it's also its production. So did the Shemitah of 2015, what did it do? Did it do anything to the world's production? Now, I want to show you, I believe we have a headline, China's factories, if you have that there. This is what happened. China is the engine of the world economy. What happened in the Shemitah? It was the longest contraction in 6 years, which is basically the plummeting of the last Shemitah. Next one. Next headline there. China December factory activity shrinks for 10 months straight. What about, it happened all over there. What about America's industrial production? Next one. U.S. production, it collapsed. Actually, production collapsed all over the world. All over the world. Now, I want to show you a graph that talks about manufacturing, and you're going to see two pink periods. The two pink periods are the two Shemitahs. The last Shemitah, look what happens to production during it, collapses. This Shemitah, it collapses as well. Production collapsed here. Look what the Shemitah did to production. Look what it did.
Wow.
It's still, and after to this, it still collapsed. Now, also, it says in the Harbinger and the Shemitah that the Shemitah will affect merchandise, because during the Shemitah, the fruits of the land would be abandoned. So they kind of piled, nothing would be done. Well, what about the fruits of merchandise, retail? Let's look at this next graph. It's showing that first peak is 2008, 2009, last Shemitah. That's showing how much merchandise is unsold, has been piling up. And now, as this Shemitah came, it started piling up. The same thing, merchandise piling up. We have a headline. What happened to the retail section there? Massive collapse. The Shemitah caused a massive collapse of retail. Next one. I like this title. Retail apocalypse. 6,000 stores closed. Next one. Retail sales in U.S. decreased worse since 2009, which is the end of the other Shemitah. Now, I want to show you one other thing here. In the Hebrew, it talks about, in Leviticus, it says this. If you shall say, what shall we eat in the 7th year, the Shemitah? We shall not sow, nor gather in our increase. Well, the word for increase there is the Hebrew word called tebuah. Tebuah means increase, it means fruit, but it also means income and revenue and earning. So, this could be translated that during the Shemitah, will it touch earning, income, and revenue? I want to show you now a chart of what happened to earnings from the Shemitah. Look at what, the pink is the Shemitah, the 2015. Look what it did to earnings in America.
It goes under the chart.
It goes
where
under.
Where the level
goes negative. Negative. Yeah. I'll show you one more chart, and then I'm going to ask you one question. But one more chart is U.S. corporate profit. Look at what happened to profit when the Shemitah came. Look what happened. That's tebuah. That's the earnings. That's what the Bible says. Now, this segment, I'm going to ask you one question. 2015, the Shemitah, was the worst year. It was the worst year to earn money in how many years? What do you think?
8 years.
Well, you think, because a lot of these things are the worst since the last Shemitah.
The last Shemitah.
The answer is 2015, the Shemitah was the worst year to earn money in 78 years.
Oh, my.
Wow.
Show the headline.
Wow.
That is literal headline. The worst year to make money in 78 years. Where does that take you to? It takes you to the Great Depression. It takes you to 1937, the second part of the Great Depression. 1937 was the year of the Shemitah. So that's how much this thing manifested.
Wow.
And before before I leave and all, I'll show you one more thing really amazing about what happened in the month of Elul. But we'll get to that. But that is just an idea of what has happened and how real it is.
I think one of the most important things to talk about this week is the Shemitah. And so many people didn't notice hardly what was being fulfilled.
Right.
So we saw the stock market, financial realms, and then we saw global trade just literally collapse.
Commerce,
Production
collapsed. What happened in the Shemitah has not stopped. You had a whole another wave of stock market collapses as this year opened, as you know, and trade is at levels they cannot even understand it. I mean, I mentioned the Baltic Dry Index, which is the trade, global trade. At the beginning of 2014, when the Shemitah began in 2014, went to 2015. Beginning of 2014, the Baltic Trade Index was at 2,000. By the end of the Shemitah, end of 2015, it was at 400. So it had crashed by 80%, where they don't even understand what's going on. They don't even know why, you know. But that's it. But that's, if you read the Harbinger and the Shemitah, it actually talks about trade, all those things that would happen. I'm going to bring this last part. I'm going to call it the Elul factor.
Okay.
It says in the Bible, in Deuteronomy, it says at the end of every 7 years you'll have a release of debts. So you will have a remission. The financial realm gets affected. There's a wiping out, a wiping clean. When does it happen? The end of the 7th year is the month of Elul. That's the last month on the civil calendar. Elul, leading up to Elul 29. Now, we already saw in some of the last Shemitahs, it was so precise that actually on the day you have the greatest crashes, you know, period. But the overall thing, you have Elul, the month of nullification. So the question is now, did the Shemitah of 2015 actually see great day crashes, day collapses there? Well, listen to the answer of this. 20% of the worst stock market day crashes in history happened in the Shemitah of 2015. 20% of them. 20% of the greatest crashes of that. And we're going to get even more specific. 20%. And actually, if you go a little bit more than the top 10, you got 30%. You have 3 of the top 10 crashes ever. Now, but when you get to the end of the Shemitah, this Elul period, you often have some, didn't have to happen, but you have some dramatic things happening in world history. Attack of 9/11 happens the last week of Elul. This is the time of nullification. World War II comes to its conclusion last week of Elul of the Shemitah, of the 7-year Shemitah, just like 9/11. The Shemitah of 2001 sees the greatest collapse in history the last week of the Shemitah Elul. So the 2008. Now, I've noted throughout the year when people ask me about that, I said, well, again, God, you can't put God in a box. But the pattern is that it tends to, if you're looking for dramatic tends to happen at the end of the Shemitah, at this period, this Elul, you know, this period. Well, when is this Elul period? This year, when was it? It began in August. August. Did anything interesting happen in August? Well, I want you to see this now. Look at, first you're going to see is the German stock market. Now look at the pink there. The pink isn't the Shemitah. The whole thing is the Shemitah. Pink is the month of Elul, right there. Now we're narrowing it down to the month. Look what happens to the stock market when Elul comes. This is how specific it is. This is the culmination of the Shemitah. Look what happened to the British market. Once Elul, it's already coming down through the Shemitah, but look what happens once Elul comes. Let's look at the Dow Jones Industrial, Wall Street. It's going down from the Shemitah. Look what happens when Elul comes. Ooh. Crash. Let's look at the next one.
Major.
That is China. China's already been crashing, one of the greatest of the Shemitah, but Elul, another one there. Notice when everything happened, it was August. Notice what you had. Black Monday. China's Black Monday. Dow. Let's actually put up some headlines. This is what happened all in Elul. This happened in the Elul of the Shemitah. Global Dow plummets, the worst intraday crash in Wall Street history, Elul. Global markets all collapse on Elul. Everything went crazy. Hundreds of billions wiped out in Elul. In fact, when I told you that 20% of the greatest crashes happened in the Shemitah, it wasn't just that. 20% of the greatest crashes in the history of Wall Street happened in the month of Elul of the Shemitah. I mean, 20% in the month of Elul. Now, I'm going to show you some last things here, but I want you to see it because it's very striking if you realize what's going on here. This is going to be the top 10 day crashes in Wall Street history. If you take it statistically, how many of those greatest 10 crashes should happen in the year of a Shemitah? It should actually be, statistically, if nothing's going on, 1 out of 7 we should see. In a moment, we're going to light up yellow if any of these happen during the year. It should be about 1 should be in yellow. But let's see what happens. 70% of the top crashes in history happened in the year of the Shemitah, or at the climax of the Shemitah. 70%. Actually, can even add another one. One of them happened in the same year, which is 2000, which was the year of Shemitah. Right before it, that would be 80%. 70%, the majority happened, only a minority happened in a non-Shemitah year. You're going to see it on a graph that's going to show you where those things happen, and the pink is the Shemitah. Those are the last 3 Shemitahs. Look at the greatest crashes. Look at where they happen in the Shemitah. Now, I'm going to show you one last thing here now. We saw 7 of those crashes. Those are 70% of the top crashes in Wall Street history. Right there. That's the last 14 years or 15 years, whatever, or actually from the 90s. Now, in one moment, before I want you to see what we're going to do. One moment, we're going to take not just the month. We're going to take Elul 29, the day of nullification. We're going to put it on that graph, and to see how close the 70% of the greatest crashes happened to the day that God appointed. Put up the graph.
Wow.
Every single one of them happens within 99% to 100% proximity to the day God appointed to wipe out the financial realm. And when I came the first time, I mean, when I came a little while back, I couldn't even, that last part is 2015. It showed up just as well. There, nothing before it, but at 2015. So the same way, so that's how precise this thing is. That's how precise it was. And 2015, it happened just as well. And you have 2 of those greatest crashes right in there.
My.
This is worldwide.
Yes.
And this is something that American Christians don't seem to get, that God is a God of the entire world. Mm-hmm. Because it's somehow, if it doesn't happen here the way they think it should happen here, but and it did happen here.
It did happen here, but here's another thing. The Shemitah, generally, it strikes the focus of the world economy, which has always been America, until this Shemitah. This Shemitah, it switched to China. And the Shemitah, what it did to China, it wiped out almost half of its financial realm in 2.5 months. Probably the greatest crash in history.
The Shemitah has overwhelmingly taken place, just as you wrote about it in your book.
Yeah.
And yet, I think it is so big that people can't see it. It's like the forest. You can't see the trees.
This is not even including the fall. America, from the American age that began in 1871 as the greatest economic power on earth, that came to an end during the Shemitah. Talk about fall. I mean, that's gigantic. That's gigantic. On top of other falls as well. But yeah, in fact, we're going to update the Shemitah.
Is America doomed? Has God already delivered us from judgment to destruction? What hope, if any, do we have for our nation? The Bible teaches that God never pours out his wrath on a nation without first sending remedial judgments and prophetic voices to warn of God's impending judgment and to call the nation to repentance. One of those prophetic voices is with us today. He is Jonathan Cahn, the author of the best-selling book, The Harbinger. Stay tuned for an in-depth interview.
Lamb and Lion Ministries presents Christ in Prophecy, a program that focuses on the fundamentals of Bible prophecy, showing how current events in the news relate to biblical predictions of end-time events and the soon return of Jesus. Now, here's your host, Dr. David Reagan.
Greetings in the name of Jesus, our blessed hope, and welcome to Christ in Prophecy. My colleague Nathan Jones and I have a very special guest with us today. He is Jonathan Cahn, the author of the best-selling book, The Harbinger, and the author of the new book, The Mystery of the Shemitah. Welcome to our program, Jonathan. We're glad to have you.
Great to be with you, Dave.
You know, you are in God's promised land here in Texas.
Yeah, up until now I thought it was Israel, but
well,
now
we
little
got you straight
theology
okay.
here, Texas.
Good to have you on, Rabbi Cahn.
Great to be here.
Well, Jonathan is the spiritual leader of the Beth Israel Worship Center in Wayne, New Jersey. In one of the issues of our magazine here in 2013, we featured Jonathan here on the cover. And he was labeled as the prophetic voice God has anointed to warn our nation of impending judgment. And as always has been the case, anyone who historically speaks out in a prophetic manner, calling people for repentance, Jonathan has, of course, been severely attacked. In our program today, we're going to discuss his basic message and also ask him about some of the accusations that have been hurled against him.
Well, Jonathan, welcome to our program. You have written a best-selling book that probably everybody viewing this has at least heard about, if they haven't read, called The Harbinger. And now you have a new book out called The Mystery of the Shemitah. Is that the correct way to pronounce that?
Yes, you did it perfectly.
And I think your writing has impacted a lot of people, but I tell you what has impacted me the most. And what has impacted me the most was the incredible speech that you presented at the presidential inaugural prayer breakfast in January of 2013. Unfortunately, the president was not there. I wish he had been. But it was a fantastic speech. And folks, I just want to point out that this is a speech that you can get on the internet. Just type in Jonathan Cahn presidential inaugural breakfast, and you must watch this. It's all over YouTube, and people can see it. So in that speech, you made this comment. The city on the hill, speaking of America, has grown dark. Its lamp has grown dim. Its glory is fading. For God is not mocked. No nation can war against the very source of its blessing and expect those blessings to remain. In just a moment, I want you to explain to us what in the world you meant by those comments.
Welcome back to Christ and Prophecy in our interview with Jonathan Cahn. Now, Jonathan, before we started, Dave read a statement that you made in the 2013 inaugural prayer breakfast. And he said, the city on the hill, you called this nation a city on a hill, and you proclaimed that we're no longer a beacon of light to the world and that our lamp has grown dim and our glory is fading. Can you explain those remarks that you made at the prayer breakfast?
Yeah, the city on the hill is the first real symbol ever given to America, before the American flag, before the eagle. This was given by John Winthrop when he wrote a famous sermon right at the beginning of America, saying that we shall be as a city on a hill, quoting from Messiah, saying you shall be a city on the hill. And so America was dedicated back then to God by the Puritans, and he said, if we follow God, we'll be the most blessed people on earth. If we turn away, the judgments of God will come. And people forget the next part of what he said. So we have America, in many ways, it has been the beacon of the gospel to the world, and God has blessed it because of that. It has been blessed as they said. And as Israel was blessed, any nation, righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach. We are now rapidly turning from God. America is now exporting, the greatest exporter of pornography in the world. I mean, darkness. It's accelerating. America's apostasy is accelerating even in the last few days. You're watching what's happening here. We are opposing God's ways. We are really holding this up in his face. And so no nation can be blessed by God as it has been, turn away from God, defy his ways continuously, and have those blessings removed. God is patient, but that will only happen up to a certain point. So we are watching, in a sense, the city on the hill greatly darkening, where it's actually at war with its own foundation, at war with its light. That was the light of America, and we are standing in danger of judgment.
At the beginning of the program, I mentioned that the Bible seems to indicate that God never pours out his wrath without putting remedial judgments and raising prophetic voices to warn a nation. And certainly you're one of those prophetic voices today, together with others that I could name. But what about remedial judgments? Do you think God is placing remedial judgments?
Yeah. Well, this is, that is how the Harbinger really began. One of the classic signs of warning that God gives in the Bible is that it happens more than once. It happens with the northern kingdom, happens with the southern kingdom. Years before the judgment or the full judgment, there is a breaching of the nation's hedge of protection. It's a strike that happens in the land. With ancient Israel, the northern kingdom, it happened in 732 BC when the Assyrian army was allowed to ravage the land. In the southern kingdom, it happened with Babylon in 605 as Babylon came in before the Great Judgment. With the northern kingdom, it was about 10 years between that first strike and then that final judgment. With the southern kingdom, it was about 19 years. So there's not a formula, but there is a pattern. So with America, we have experienced it. The Harbinger begins with that first strike that happens when America's hedge of protection is removed. When 9/11 comes, it's a shaking of America. It's a wake-up call to America. And I think most believers even felt that. And what happens is people flocked to churches. It looked like there was going to be a revival, if you remember. People were flocking. Everything was God for 3 weeks. And then after that, it ended because there was no repentance. Without repentance, there can be no revival. And so we, instead of going better, we got worse.
There's also a surge of patriotism. And in fact, we saw bumper stickers everywhere that said, "God bless America, God bless America."
Yeah.
And my wife one day said, "That's wrong."
Yes.
I said, "What do you mean? He's already blessed America. We need a bumper sticker that says, 'America bless God.'"
Absolutely.
And she designed one, and we printed it. Yes.
I heard of that, and I've said that. I didn't know it came from your wife. I mean, truly, that's exactly it. And the thing is that what happens if you don't come back? What happened with Israel when they had their first warning strike with this attack? They turned away. They grew more defiant instead of repentant. And so what happened is these harbingers or these remedial judgments or these signs of a nation in danger of judgment start coming one after another. And what happened with America is that we've grown worse, far worse than before that. So that's what happens when you reject God. That's what happens. So, and the same harbingers, or there were identified 9 harbingers of warning of judgment that happened to ancient Israel, are now reappearing in America. They are now on American soil. Some have involved American leaders, even the president. That's why I think that the presidential inaugural had something to do with that he keeps calling me to Washington now for some reason. So I believe that without any question, we are on a progression towards judgment. Now, even if you didn't know about the harbingers, it's clear. It's clear. But the fact is, they are reappearing, and it's one after the other. It's happening in precision. Some have happened in New York City, where we are. Some have happened in Washington. And since the book, The Harbinger, came out, it has continued. They have not stopped. These manifestations of signs of warning have continued, just as America has accelerated in its apostasy. Yes. So we are in danger, without any question.
Do you see the judgments then for the nations, that Israel is the model for the world?
Yes.
So that any nation would fall under the same falling of judgments if people, as a nation, reject God?
Well, it can. Yeah. Well, the thing is that God is consistent. Number one, God is the same God. He doesn't change. And number two, the Bible says what was written to Israel is for is for us. So in other words, that's the one model we have for anything. He dealt with Israel. Israel's the center of his purposes. But anytime you hear a message preached, it's generally something that happened from Israel that applies to all of our lives. So we see that, and it's not only Israel. God also judged other nations back then. But Israel is the template, of course.
But there are just so many parallels between us and Israel.
It's amazing. Yeah.
And you've pointed those out over and over. I have over the years, too, in some of the books I've written, to point out that they had great spiritual leaders. I'm talking about Judah in particular.
Yes.
They had great spiritual leaders. They had prosperity. They had safety. God blessed them in so many ways, and just as He has done us.
Yes.
But it ultimately led to pride and to rebellion. And that is exactly what's happening to us. And Jonathan, there are people who, I run across Christians who actually think God sits on the throne wrapped in an American flag. And they say, "Oh, God would never touch us. He would never touch us." What did they say to Jeremiah? Yeah. "God lives in our temple. He will never touch us." Yes. Let me tell you, if He will destroy Jerusalem and His very temple, He will destroy the United States of America.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And people need to know that.
Yeah. There is something special. I mean, there's two extremes. One is to say that there's nothing special about America, and there's no link. That's not true.
Oh, that's not true.
On the other hand, it's to say that America is Israel, or that God is the main thing is patriotism. That's not it. The main thing is God. There's only one God. I mean, even patriotism can become a God.
That's right.
So the point is that what God says, that there's no nation, and exactly what you said. If Israel itself, which was built by God, and the temple, the Lord said to Jeremiah, that you keep saying this temple, I'll destroy this temple. I love this. It's like, he said to Ezekiel, your wife is going to die. And what God is saying is that this is how much this is hurting me, but this has to happen, to Israel. So the thing is that if that happened, we certainly cannot say we are exempt. We are in danger. In fact, it's the opposite, Dave, and that is that too much is given, much is required.
That's right.
The more we have
That's
been
right.
blessed, the more we are accountable.
Absolutely.
And the more severe.
Let me read you a passage from the Old Testament and get your response to it. This, to me, is two of the saddest verses in the Old Testament. "And the Lord, the God of their fathers, sent word to them again and again by His messengers, because He had compassion on His people and on His dwelling place. But they continually mocked the messengers of God, despised His words, scoffed at His prophets, until the wrath of God arose against His people, until there was no remedy."
Yes. Here He is sending and pleading, and when you reject the pleading, when you reject the warning, there's nothing left. And and that is, I get the principle that when 9/11 happened, in rejecting any kind of coming back to God, we have so descended so much worse,
Yes.
so much worse. And so, therefore, the only, people say, well, if there's the harbingers are appearing, is there any hope? And I say it's the opposite. The fact that there are harbingers or there's warning, there's hope, because why would God waste his warning? Up to the point he's warning, there's hope, But if you reject all the warnings, then there's no hope.
Yes.
Now, folks ask sometimes when they read your book, they say, well, that was about Israel because Israel was in a covenant relationship with God. When the founding Puritans, the founding fathers of this country called it a city on a hill, were they proclaiming that this nation was also in a covenant relationship with God and therefore we fell under the same blessings and curses as Israel? Or do you see that we were supposed to be, as a Christian example, that's how we fell under the blessings and curses?
Well, a few things. One is that the Puritans did believe that they covenanted with God. They made a covenant. Now we can't say what God did on his side. As with Israel, we know in the Bible there's one nation that God says I've made a covenant with. So that's but they did. Did God honor that? I believe He did. I mean, they dedicated America and they said this was going to happen, and He blessed America. So the thing is that it's almost like. That's all there. There was a real parallel with America and Israel. Not that one replaces, not that one is the Israel. But they even said, they even saw America as after the pattern of Israel. They at one point considered Hebrew as the language.
That's right.
Did they really?
Thanksgiving is the Feast of Tabernacles. We're actually it's right now. It's the Feast of Tabernacles. You cannot take that thing away. It's there. It's embedded in our DNA. It's there. So the patterns, regardless of the issue of covenant, that's not foundational.
Okay.
To this, but the point is that they did dedicate, and there is this pattern, and God has blessed, and God is consistent in His dealings, and He has blessed us as He blessed Israel, and the principles work. I mean, they're there. So therefore, any nation that has been blessed by God and turns away and defies God is subject to judgment. Any nation. But the fact that we have so many parallels to Israel makes it even more. And the fact that John Winthrop literally said, he said that the same judgments that came on Israel will come on us. Well, the harbinger is saying that there is a replaying. It's not that we're Israel, but there's a replaying. God is consistent. There's a template of judgment, of national judgment, and it's happening not generally. It's happening specifically.
Yes.
Well, one of the things that has really astounded me is the speed at which America has begun to secularize and paganize. It's just on an exponential curve. Who would ever have believed, like 20 years ago, that we would have a president who every June would issue a proclamation of the celebration of sexual perversion? Yeah. And yet President Obama has done that every June.
And it says, and at the bottom, after he says we are to celebrate that, at the bottom it says, in the year of our Lord.
In the year, I got so upset. I'd write him every year, and of course I didn't get any response except an IRS review. But nonetheless, I finally decided to try sarcasm. So the last time he did it, I wrote to him and I said, "Sir, you're supposed to be a man who believes in equality for all and so forth. Why are you discriminating in this proclamation? Why aren't you celebrating? You're celebrating lesbianism, homosexuality, bisexual, and transgender. Why don't you add prostitutes? Why don't you add those who have sex with animals? Why don't you add those who are adulterers and those who are fornicators? We might as well celebrate it all." I didn't get a response to that either.
You didn't? Well, wait till next year. Maybe it'll come out.
Well, do you believe then that the United States, since we have removed God out of our school systems, out of our government, everything and then if we follow the pattern of Israel, are we now here at Romans 1:24 where it says, "Therefore God delivered them over to the cravings of their heart, to sexual impurity, so that their bodies were degraded among themselves. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshiped and served something created instead of the Creator, who is praised forever. Amen." And then it goes on to say how worse and worse and worse they get.
Yeah. Well, the principle is already in effect.
It
begins with, they're turning away from God. They are not worshiping. They're going after the creations of the Creator. Then it says He gives them over. Then comes sexual immorality.
That's right.
We are in that. The pattern of ancient Israel is they as you said, they were blessed. Then they sought the blessings instead of the blesser. They started then in that driving God out of their culture. We've done that. It's already been happening. The 60s, the 70s, driving Him out. And then they start calling what is evil good and what is good evil. It goes right together. The more a nation calls what is evil good, it will call what is good, like believers, and God evil. Yeah. And then it started promoting sexual immorality. We're in that. They also started lifting up their children as sacrifices, to Baal and Moloch. Well, people say, well, how can you compare that with America? Well, America has not lifted up thousands of children. It has lifted up millions of children on the altar of convenience and has killed them. I mean, over 50 million children. In other words, God says, you have blood on your hands. How can I hear you? So if that's not judgment, if that doesn't cry out for judgment, nothing does. We have blasphemed God.
That's right. You know, one thing I wanted to ask you about is this. People always ask me, do you think there's any hope for revival? Can we have revival? And I say, well, of course there's hope for it. In fact, there's even an example of it in the history of Judah. Manasseh was the worst king that they had, and they had a tremendous revival right after that with Josiah. But the moment Josiah died, it had become so ingrained in the fabric of the nation that they immediately turned back to their paganism, and God took care of the nation.
Yes, we have. There's different templates. I mean, you have that where the judgment was forestalled because of Josiah, and then and a turning. You have Nineveh totally saved. You have others where you have Sodom. There was nothing. There just wasn't there. Yeah. If I look at the culture, if I looked at my own understanding, I don't see any hope. How do you turn this around? Yeah. But with God, there's God is always greater than that. What I do believe is going to happen. What I do, and from this all the template and you following it, I do believe we're going to have a great shaking of this nation. I believe there's going to be gigantic shaking. I believe it will affect our economy. It will collapse. I believe there'll be a financial collapse. I believe it'll be more than that, because the pattern is that it escalates. Just as the apostasy escalates. You had 9/11. I believe that was just a foreshadow.
And money's our God, right?
Yeah, well, that's part of it. And yes. And so I mean, so the thing is that I believe that only people say, well, if there's shaking, how is there hope? I believe it's the opposite. Only if there is a shaking, to me, can there be hope? Most of us came to the Lord because of shaking. Same with nations. I mean, same with nations. So I believe, people say, well, it's going to be judgment or revival. I believe there can be both. I believe it can be judgment, and yet out of that, there will be people turning to the Lord, remnant. Those who turn, there can be revival. So that, to me, that is, at this point, is our only hope. I believe that's going to happen. And I believe that God's will is that through the shaking and through this, that there will be revival and salvation among those who turn.
Yes.
But it's going to take that. We've grown so deaf that God has to shout now.
Well, one of the things that concerns me is the way in which Christians have been marginalized.
Yes.
I mean, I had Carl Gallups on this program. I think you know Carl, and we were talking about the fact that what he and I believe, the core of our Christian belief, was the core of Christianity just 25, 30 years ago. Now we're considered to be fanatics on the margin because we believe in the literal meaning of the Bible and this sort of thing.
This is exactly what happened to Israel. That's what's happening here. You had the people who were in times past would have been the heroes, prophets, heroes. Yes. All of a sudden, they become the marginal people. They become those who are persecuted. When they lift up the prophets of Baal became the centerpiece of culture. They had been on the extreme. They had been on the fringe. They had been in the dark. Now they're lifted up, and the opposite is then the culture will seek to put believers in the dark. They started persecuting the prophets, persecuting Elijah, and so Ahab goes to Elijah and said, "You troubler of Israel," and Elijah refuses to be redefined by Ahab. And he says, "No, you're the troubler of Israel. I'm following God. You've departed," and that's very important. Yeah. We can't let the culture redefine us. The point is that's exactly the case. To the exact degree that the nation or culture enshrines darkness, calls it light, they will call the light darkness. Every time darkness or immorality is accepted, righteousness is persecuted.
And the thing that's so disturbing about all that is the number of Christian leaders who get right in bed with it because they want the approval of society.
Yeah, or that's right, because now the cost is greater. Now, if someone says something, their neck is stuck out. Nobody wants to do that, and then you get persecuted. But if nobody does that, then it's lost. If nobody stands up, the thing is, there's also another level of pastors and leaders who just don't want to talk about it. They will say, okay, now we can't say anything anymore. And you see this. We're in trouble if we do not.
Same thing happened in Hitler's Germany.
Yes, exactly. And there was very few who stood, and they were the radical ones. But, when you look back in history or God's history judges them as the great ones. And we have to be great. We cannot be afraid. This is not the time. When the dark gets darker, the lights have to get
one of the
brighter.
things I've been amazed at is how God has opened special doors for you to proclaim this message, for example, to the Congress. Tell about that.
Yeah, someone was watching me talk about the Harbinger, and they said, you know what? we have to do something. We have to get some, and also the doors open to them to open up on Capitol Hill to have an event. Because it happened because of the Harbinger, that an event of proclaiming the gospel in the Capitol to members of Congress. And originally it was once a year
In the Capitol?
in the Capitol building, and you had members of Congress there, and you had Christian leaders and members of Congress. They asked me to speak. They had various speakers, and basically total. You know, it was like the presidential inaugural in 4 minutes or 10 minutes. And the thing is that's been every year. They haven't had that. They told me for over 100 years. They used to have services in the Capitol.
Oh yeah.
You know. So and then this is just last month. This now has become a weekly service now for members of Congress.
Oh, that's
so I was there. They asked me to open it up. But yeah, the Lord keeps calling me back to Washington. And I think the reason is that, you know, in the Bible, when there's warnings and prophetic warnings, the Lord wants it to go to the throne. He wants it to go to the leaders.
Well, in that regard, let's end this segment by you telling this remarkable story about George Washington.
You blew my mind with that. Chapter 19. People need to read chapter 19. Yeah. The mystery ground, you called it.
Yes.
We've got about 3 minutes here.
Okay, I think I can do it. Yeah, the Harbinger has 9. If there's 9 harbingers, then it leads up to these mysteries. The mystery ground is this. When judgment came to Israel, in 586 BC, the destruction returned to the same ground where the nation was dedicated to God, which is the Temple Mount. This is where Solomon dedicated the future and all that, and this is where they prayed and put the whole nation in God's hand. Well, when that was destroyed, God was saying, "You've broken the covenant, return to where you have fallen." Now, here's the principle: the judgment returns to the ground of consecration. What about America? America began as a nation as we know it, not in 1776, that was independence, but it was formed in 1789, first time you had a president, the Constitution, you had the president over the government. It was George Washington's inauguration. He places his hand on the Bible and gives a prophetic warning in that first speech, which says basically, paraphrase, it's in the Harbinger, but paraphrase is that if America ever turns away from God, the blessings will be removed. Then he and the entire first government go to a place to consecrate America to God. And so if we can find out where that is, that's the consecration ground on the first day dedicated to God. Well, it was the nation's capital. The nation's capital was not Washington, D.C. The nation's capital was New York City.
Right.
Ooh, here it comes.
New York City, where was it? It was in Lower Manhattan. Where was America's consecration ground? They dedicated America to God. America's consecration ground is ground zero.
Oh,
the judgment, the destruction returns to the same ground, the ancient mystery, and when it happens, a shockwave comes down from ground zero, strikes Federal Hall where Washington gave the warning of what would happen if we ever turned away from God, puts a crack in there, but all around ground zero, all the buildings are destroyed except one is spared, the little stone chapel where they dedicated America to God. And the reason why it was spared, they said, because there was an object that shielded it from 9/11. The object was the Harbinger, was the 6th Harbinger, the sycamore. The Harbinger saved the church. And the message the message of the Harbinger is not to condemn America to judgment, it's to wake it up. That God is saying, return, return, return. I mean, all our eyes, the media was focused on our consecration ground. We didn't know it. God is saying, return to America and even to his people, to the church.
And this is historically documented.
You can go there, and people have gone from all over the world to go there, and you'll see all the places.
Well, I stopped believing in coincidence many years ago. I believe only in God incidences. And I tell you, that was a God incidence.
Total. Yes.
Oh boy, that is an amazing story.
Yeah, and it's absolute. And God's fingerprints are all there. I mean, and that's what I wasn't looking for anything when the.
Well, you talk about God's fingerprints. When we had the great collapse of the economy in 2008, I picked up the newspaper. It was on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, if I remember right. And here was our stock market crash, and it said 777 points. And I thought, that's like God signed it.
Yes, and that was, and the timing of that. I mean, this is now we're opening up. We won't do the mystery of the Shemitah, but the point is that the timing had to do with a biblical mystery of sevens that's in the Bible. It's so exact, it's so precise. God is in charge of everything, and that's one of the things. People say, well, what do I do? Well, I say, listen, be at peace. This is telling you if you're in God's will, he has everything in his hands. So just make sure you're in God's will.
Welcome back to Christ in Prophecy and our interview with Jonathan Cahn, a Messianic rabbi from New Jersey who has been anointed to proclaim a message of warning to our nation. Jonathan, at the beginning of the program today, I said we were going to spend a little time getting into controversies stirred up by your books, and we didn't have time to do that. So could you come back next week and let's talk
I'll come
about
back for a controversy.
Okay.
Excellent. All right. Well, folks, that's our program for this week, and I hope it's been a blessing to you. And I hope you'll be back with us next week so we can talk to Rabbi Cahn. We'll continue our interview then. Until then, this is Nathan Jones speaking for myself and Dr. David Radin saying, look up, be watchful, for our redemption is drawing near. For more detailed information about America in Prophecy, order a copy of Dr. Reagan's book, America the Beautiful. This book is now in its 3rd edition. It has been very popular because it responds directly to one of the most frequently asked questions in the field of Bible prophecy, namely, where is the United States in prophecy? Dr. Reagan, who was formerly a professor of international relations, outlines all the spiritual principles that govern God's relationship with the nations of the world and presents ancient Israel as the prophetic type of modern-day America, showing the close parallels between the two. This book can be yours for a gift of $15 or more plus shipping. You can request a copy by calling the number you see on the screen between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. Central Time, Monday through Friday, or order through our website at lamblion.com. And when you place your request, we will include a copy of Dr. Reagan's Prophetic Manifesto, which describes in detail the deterioration of our society and the apostasy that is raging in the church. Both books can be yours for a donation of $15 or more, plus the cost of shipping. When you contact us,